Hello, everyone, and welcome. We'll get started in just a minute. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Just give it another minute for the attendees to populate. Hey, hello, everyone, again, and welcome. We'll get started in just a minute. Okay. Hello, and welcome to the 87th meeting of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Review Committee. My name is Melanie O'Brien, and I am the designated federal official to the review committee. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded. The recording, transcripts, and meeting minutes will be made publicly available after this meeting and will include the names of all those in attendance at today's call. If you object, you may disconnect at this time. This is a public meeting of a federal advisory committee established by the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRA of 1990. And this meeting is held under the Federal Advisory Committee Act, FACA, and its implementing regulations. This meeting was noticed in the Federal Register on October 3rd, 2023. An agenda for this meeting and materials are posted to the NAGPRA Programs Events page. The Secretary of the Interior issued a charter for this review committee in November 2022, which governs its objectives and scope of activities. For purposes of the review committee, the purpose of the review committee is to monitor and review the inventory and identification process and repatriation activities under sections 5, 6, and 7 of the Act. The review committee is also responsible for reporting to Congress on the progress and any barriers encountered in carrying out its responsibilities. FACA requires that advisory committee membership be fairly balanced in terms of points of view represented and the functions to be performed. To achieve this, NAGPRA requires that the review committee be comprised of 7 members, 3 members nominated by Indian tribes, Native Hawaiian organizations, and traditional Native American religious leaders, with at least 2 such persons being traditional Indian religious leaders. 3 members are nominated by national museum organizations and scientific organizations, and 1 member is appointed from a list of persons developed and consented to by all of the other members. Members are appointed by the Secretary of the Interior and serve as advisors to the Secretary on NAGPRA-related issues. Currently, the review committee has 7 appointed members. With that as introduction, I'd like to start with a roll call of the committee members. Please respond out loud. Holly Aloha Ayau.
Aloha.
Dominique DeBobienne.
Here.
Angela Garcia Lewis.
Present.
Timothy McEwen.
Here.
Armand Menthorn.
Here.
Toby Patrick.
Here.
Shelby Tisdale.
Present.
Thank you all. I would also like to acknowledge the individuals who are assisting me today in conducting this meeting. With me are 2 attorneys from the Department of the Interior Office of the Solicitor, Brady Blasco with the Division of Parks and Wildlife, and Stephen Simpson with the Division of Indian Affairs. From the National NAGPRA program, Lisa Koszalski is the review committee coordinator responsible for organizing this meeting and preparing the minutes and transcripts of these proceedings. I hereby call this meeting to order. Before we begin with our agenda today, I believe the committee would like to open the meeting with a traditional opening. Mr. Patrick has agreed to provide that opening.
Thank you.
Open with one of our worship songs. Yes, my God, say a prayer after we get done with the song. Yeah.
You know it. Seneca. Y muy yo. Now, stamina. To meet Leo. Inakas in Yuma, New Nika. Now, stamina, he to talk an hour, the spot. You look how Inakas he was. Sapa cups, now at this. Salah, stamina wa Krishwa. He and you were done. Good, go with your for stamina, Tamaka. He won't die in Telefosa.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
Thank you both. Okay, before we begin with our agenda today, I would like to make just a quick announcement to the committee, but also to those in attendance today. And that is that we did just last week post the grant opportunities for the fiscal year 2024 for NAGPRA grants. Those are available on the NAGPRA website, nps.gov/NAGPRA, and go to grants to find access to both of the funding opportunities for the fiscal year 2024. In particular, I wanted to note for the review committee that we have made some changes to the repatriation grants in particular. Specifically, we have provided more time for applications to be received for repatriation grants. In previous years, it was a 6-month period, generally from about November to May, in which applications could be received. We've been able to extend that to actually 1.5 years of accepting applications in hopes that we'll be able to support more repatriation projects throughout the course of a year with a longer time period. And secondly, we have increased the funding limit, or the top number that could be requested in a repatriation grant, from $15,000 to $25,000. So I need to make both of those notes, both for the committee as well as for the public. We are still at this time under a continuing resolution, so we do not yet know what the full fiscal year 24 grant funding will be. Okay, with that, we will move to our first presentation today, which is from the Illinois State Museum. Brooke Morgan, I am bringing you in as a panelist, so you should be able to turn on your video and unmute yourself. Hi, Brooke.
Hi, good afternoon.
Please, Brooke, go right ahead.
Thank you. As Melanie mentioned, my name is Brooke Morgan, and I'm the Curator of Anthropology at the Illinois State Museum. I'm here today on behalf of the Illinois State Museum System, which includes our Research and Collections Center, Dixon Mounds Museum, and Lockport Gallery. The Illinois State Museum welcomes the opportunity to respond to the NAGPRA Review Committee's requests for budget information regarding current and future compliance of NAGPRA. The Illinois State Museum is in the process of changing structures and practices to support consultation and repatriation work. Prior to fiscal year 2023, NAGPRA work was funded through 2 NAGPRA consultation and documentation grants of $82,105 in 1995 and $88,000 in 2021. The first grant enabled the ISM to review its collections, consult with tribes, and submit initial inventories and summaries of its NAGPRA holdings to the National Park Service. The current grant focuses on consulting with tribes and updating the Dixon Mounds site inventory, ultimately leading to repatriation. After completion of the first grant and initial repatriations, a percentage of staff work duties was spent on NAGPRA compliance, resulting in several consultations and repatriations funded by the ISM or the nonprofit Illinois State Museum Society through 2014. Between 2015 and 2016, the ISM was temporarily closed due to state budgetary issues, and staff most familiar with NAGPRA retired or moved elsewhere. Once the ISM reopened, staff were hired who brought NAGPRA to the forefront, and the staffing structure began to change to develop capacity for more proactive NAGPRA work to occur. By fiscal year 2023, the ISM was able to devote approximately $1,351,944 to NAGPRA compliance. This includes consultations with more than a dozen tribal nations on multiple sites throughout Illinois, housing and care of NAGPRA collections, travel for repatriations out of state, staff salaries and benefits, and the final year of the NAGPRA grant to complete the Dixon Mounds inventory update. The ISM recognizes there is much work required to repatriate NAGPRA materials and its collections. Thus far, funding to make the work possible has principally come from external sources, namely National Park Service grants. The ISM must increase its own capacity in order to provide more consultation opportunities with tribal nations affiliated with the ancestors and funerary objects currently housed and cared for at the museum's facilities. We currently estimate it will cost approximately $1,530,584 per year to complete required NAGPRA work. As unexpected and unpredicted costs arise, the state of Illinois is committed to ensuring that NAGPRA needs are prioritized and in alignment with the desires of our tribal partners. This commitment is represented by providing more funding to NAGPRA-related activities and including the hiring of a NAGPRA officer in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brooke. Mr. Chair, I'll turn the discussion to you.
Were there any questions from the members? Dr. McEwen?
Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Is that for me? Oh, sorry.
First, I want to thank you, Brooke, for your report. You know, when the committee met recently at Indiana, it was a good meeting. And unfortunately, it was concerning because of the lack of repatriations by Indiana and the very large number of human remains that they have. And we have, I guess, indicators and some prompting for continued communication from Indiana on how they are going to address the situation that they have. And again, it's very concerning because of the large number of human remains that they have. But understanding, Brooke, that too, there are institutes in the homelands of Indiana, Iowa, Illinois, and southern Michigan, and southern Wisconsin that continue to remain out of compliance. And this is a concern. And there are even some posturing against any need or requirement to the compliance of the law. And your report today is a good effort. And we hope, Brooke, that your effort will be reflected by these other museums that exist complying with NAGPRA law. So again, Brooke, want to thank you and hope that this meeting today can help and assist and send a message to these other places that resist complying with the law. So thank you, Brooke.
Thank you.
Dr. McEwen, did you have comments?
Excuse me?
Yes.
Brooke, I want to thank you for the presentation. You went through the numbers a little fast, so could you tell me the 2023 number was a million something?
Yes, the 2023 number was $1,351,944.
And is that for 1 year?
Yes, and that includes everything from, that's not just staff time and efforts, but also we have fairly large facilities. And so the cost of housing collections and caring for them in the manner that tribes have asked us to is included in that. But yes, that's for the fiscal year. And then that second number is $1,530,584. So we anticipate there being an increase in funds towards NAGPRA compliance. And I also submitted this, what I read today, I submitted this to Lisa this morning, so it will be added to the meeting materials. Yeah, she's thumbs up.
Much appreciated. The 1.5 million, is that per year or for to be done? However long that takes.
That's per year. The terminal date on that is unknown because our NAGPRA work is not, we're kind of operating on a logarithmic scale right now, where we're doing a very big push to do the Dixon Mounds repatriation. And we know that different sites and different cases will take different amounts of investment. So it's difficult to say exactly how long it will take, but we hope that with our tribal partners, we're able to make the best determinations in an efficient manner.
Much appreciated. I know coming up with cost estimates or going through your budget to come up with numbers is a tedious exercise, but I think it's very useful to us to get real on the ground numbers to help us decide how we want to make recommendations to Congress about funding. So I really appreciate your effort on this. Thank you very much.
Certainly.
Are there any other comments or questions? Yes, Dominique.
Hi, Brooke. Thank you for your presentation. I'm curious, when you calculate your numbers for the curation costs, are all of the collections that you curate dedicated to that figure NAGPRA collections, or are there additional collections that are grouped under that as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. We currently do not have a separate NAGPRA space dedicated to NAGPRA collections, but we are working on that. That's something that we've been working on with our tribal partners. And so currently it includes more than just NAGPRA collections, but we anticipate in the future we may be able to streamline that because of the relocation and condensing into one NAGPRA collection space of the collections of concern.
Brooke, this is Holly Aloha. I'm not sure if you mentioned it. Could you just briefly describe what the scope is of the NAGPRA cultural items collections at the museum? Like, what are we dealing with?
Right. So the majority of our collections have been reported as culturally unidentifiable human remains and associated funerary objects. We are reviewing those because I believe that was only meant to be a placeholder and not a final determination. And so we are reviewing those currently with about a dozen tribes. The scope is large. We know that it's greater than 7,000 ancestors. We know that, as the repository for the state of Illinois, a lot of legacy collections came to us before there were state laws that prevented any excavation of unmarked burial sites, whether those were mounds or graveyards or cemeteries. The primary project that we're working on right now, the Dixon Mounds Inventory, that was a museum project where a series of mounds were excavated by the state in order to build a new museum facility. So that very much is it's a large collection. It's about 1/6 of our holdings, our NAGPRA holdings. And so we decided to start there and work with our tribal partners to hopefully lay a good foundation for future repatriations based on a similar model. We do also hold ethnographic items. We have done some repatriations to tribes of sacred objects and objects of cultural patrimony. We regularly communicate with tribes on any cultural materials that we may have in our collection and respond to their requests for that information. But by and large, our collection is, our NAGPRA collection is human remains and funerary objects.
And you said there are about 12 tribes that are being consulted currently?
Yes, invitations that's for Dixon Mounds in particular. Invitations went out to 20 tribes, and we have a response of 12 tribes who have all been involved throughout. And so we were very encouraged that we had such positive response, and we're very, very close to being able to submit that updated inventory and notice of inventory completion for publication.
That's very encouraging. Thank you. Thank you, Brooke. Members, any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Armin.
Brooke, you mentioned the number, culturally identifiable, 7,000, is that correct?
That's approximate. We know it is around there. We're double checking our numbers because we are regularly, as we work with tribes and revisit collections, updating those numbers. So that's our best estimate at this point, yes.
Okay, and then is there, I guess, a specific or in general terms, a time frame on how these culturally unidentifiable will be worked with?
We hope that, as I mentioned, we're starting with a very large site, and one of the more I would say historically problematic and troubling sites. And so I think that by working with our tribal partners to establish this trust in consultation and determine how they would like us to proceed, we're able to then work on other sites in the same geographic area on a much more on a quicker turnaround based on the relationships we've already developed. So that's sort of how we're looking at the process moving forward, is looking at sort of geographic regions of the state, whether it's by county or even a broader region than that. And we're also working with other institutions who are working on county-wide inventories in Illinois. And so whether those are split or shared collections or not, we are trying to make sure that for our tribal partners, they're not needing to consult on the same general locations over and over and over again with different institutions. We're trying to work in partnership with other institutions as well. So I can't give you a definitive time frame, but we certainly hope that we will complete the Dixon Mounds repatriation, and it will lead immediately into the next project. And we keep this momentum so that we can get those collections repatriated in a timely manner.
Hey, Brooke, two last things. If the committee, Brooke, can be updated on your progress in your work. And then the second thing, Brooke, is, you know, as earlier stated, you have neighbors and institutes and other entities that are resistant to complying with NAGPRA. And if there's anything, Brooke, that the committee can help with that resistance, please let us know. Because what we don't want is for your work to be hampered or slowed down. And the resistance, it has to be lessened, it has to be mitigated. And to understand how cooperation works is when everybody's on the same page and knowing the same thing. And again, Brooke, it's a concern that some of your counterparts are resistant. And finally, if again, Brooke, if there's anything that committee can do, or Melanie or Lisa, please let us know. Thank you.
I will certainly do that, and we will certainly keep you apprised of our progress in upcoming meetings. Thank you.
Maybe just one more question. Can you briefly describe what the identification process is that the museum is following? And what I'm particularly interested in is the role of traditional knowledge in the identification process with the tribes that you're consulting.
Yeah, it's interesting in the Midwest, right? Because we have such, in Illinois in particular, and I'm sure you've heard it in from Indiana and Ohio and other states like us, that we are considered removal states. And so we do not have any federally recognized tribes headquartered within our state borders. The tribes that we consult with have all been removed from the state multiple times often. And so it's interesting, the conversations, the consultations that occur. Oftentimes cultural affiliation is not one of the first concerns of the tribes. It is taking care of those ancestors. And so the way that we approach affiliation is by taking all lines of evidence, including traditional knowledge, including oral history, including what is known about tribes in their own homelands. And so it's not really a matter of weighing one thing against another. It's bringing everything together and realizing that, a lot of the sites that we're working on also have a tremendous time depth. And so people lived there over time and throughout a very long period of time in history. And so bringing all that information together, it's really not, it's not a challenge for us to find these ancestors culturally affiliated. I think that that's actually a pretty straightforward thing, and not something that we've had disagreements with our tribal partners. It's been fairly straightforward, and ultimately at the end of the day, it's making sure that those ancestors and their items are cared for and returned to the earth.
Excellent. Mahalo. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Members, more? See any? All right. Thank you, Brooke. Appreciate your time. Melanie, to you.
Yes, thank you. We will move on to the second presentation on the agenda today from the Department of the Interior. And we have two presenters, which I will bring in to speak to you. Rachel Brown, you should be able to unmute and turn on your video. Hello, Rachel. And Emily Paulus. Let me see, there are two of you here. Emily Paulus, I'm going to. There we go. Hopefully, Emily, you'll be able to turn on your video and unmute yourself momentarily. You should be able to do so now. Emily, are you able to turn on your video or unmute yourself? She's trying. There we go. Excellent. Great. Thank you. Rachel and Emily.
I think Emily may not be able to unmute right now. But I can start us off just real quick from Department of Interior while she works through some of her technical issues. So hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members for providing the opportunity for myself and Emily to come speak with you today. We really appreciate this opportunity. My name is Rachel Brown. I serve as the Senior Advisor for the Assistant Secretary for Policy Management and Budget. Prior to joining this role, I worked at the Bureau of Reclamation and their Native American Affairs Office. And prior to that, I worked at the National Park Service and the American Indian Liaison Office and had the pleasure of working directly with Melanie and her staff over the years. And so it's really a great honor to join you today and to provide an update on some of the work that DOI is doing with our NAGPRA coordinators and with our NAGPRA programs in the bureaus under the direction and leadership of Secretary Holland. And so as I know Emily will provide some additional background on the work that we are doing, but as you all are well aware, and I believe was shared with you recently, the Secretary's office has issued a policy memo to all the bureaus and offices with NAGPRA responsibilities, outlining the expectations and policies of the department in compliance with NAGPRA. Additionally, that memo directed the Assistant Secretary for Policy Management and Budget to develop an action plan in coordination with our bureaus and offices, as well as to convene both a leadership level within the department, working group, and a working group of the NAGPRA coordinators to ensure consistent policies across the department, as well as to ensure compliance and coordination among our bureaus. And I would say, this is an extremely high priority for Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Mooney, who leads the Policy Management and Budget hallway for Interior. And just as a little background, PMB is responsible for all department-wide policy compliance, as well as department-wide budgeting. So plays a real central role in making sure the execution of programs and policies are consistently carried out across DOI. And so as we move forward, I know Emily will be joining us to give a little bit more background on the action plan steps and where we are, but please know the assistant secretaries are convening at their level to discuss NAGPRA responsibilities, and to further support and facilitate the full and complete repatriation of sacred items and ancestors held within DOI collections. We recognize that for too long, these items have been and ancestors have been in DOI collections. And it is our responsibility to uphold not only the spirit and letter of NAGPRA, but to work directly with tribal nations, Native Hawaiian community, and lineal descendants to ensure respectful and timely repatriation. And so we are working with Emily and her staff, as well as the staff within National NAGPRA and the bureaus and offices across Interior to not only elevate and highlight the responsibilities of NAGPRA that all leadership within DOI have, but also to make sure we are leveraging all of our resources and working together with tribes, with Native Hawaiian organizations, with lineal descendants to expedite repatriations. And so I just want to thank the committee for allowing us this time to come and speak with you. I want to thank you all for your leadership in this area and for continuing to hold us in high standards. And we look forward to continuing this conversation with you and hope to be invited back to future meetings to provide updates and to answer questions. And we just greatly appreciate the time that you've given us today. I'm going to turn to Emily now and see if she's able to unmute and join us. It looks like so. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel, and apologies to all for a whole series of technology breakdowns. And I will overshare that my children are home ill and we're prepped upstairs to watch on my spouse's computer, but between a phone and my work computer, those failed. So here I am. Rachel, thank you so much for that introduction and filling in while I sort out. I'd like to regroup, catch my breath, and share. So, Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the review committee, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon about what Rachel outlined as Department of Interior's steps to prioritize Bureau compliance with the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And I want to thank Madam DFO Melanie O'Brien for inviting this presentation with you today. As mentioned, I'm Emily Paulus. I work with Rachel. I serve as the division lead for Museum and Cultural Resources in the Office of Policy Management and Budget in the Office of the Secretary of the Department. As you heard from Rachel, she is the Senior Advisor to the Assistant Secretary for Policy Management and Budget. And again, we're here to share information, broad overview, and then some details on steps to elevate, prioritize, and focus internally on the department's own compliance and repatriation responsibilities. As shared, this effort is framed by memoranda from senior leadership and an action plan and 3 documents that were shared with you in your meeting materials at the end of October, on October 25th. The members of the NAGPRA community may not be that familiar with the Office of Policy Management and Budget, or PMB, but certainly in comparison to other interior agencies, I'd like to share a little bit about our office and how we fit in. So we're led by our Assistant Secretary, and the office oversees policies, management initiatives, administrative functions, performance, and budget across the department. The office is responsible for cross-cutting management and operational issues affecting the department's ability to fulfill this mission. And a relevant aspect of the office's scope of responsibilities is to develop, analyze, and oversee policy, drive management reform, and guide programs that require departmental attention because they are due to international or national concern, budgetary significance, legislative requirements, precedent-setting nature, or issues crossing bureau and office lines. So it was within this function that our Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, Joan Mooney, elevated and focused discussion among the departmental leadership on the status of bureau compliance and readiness to adapt and implement the department's own revised NAGPRA regulations. And as we know, in 2021, Interior prioritized revision of those regulations with a proposed rule published last October and a final rule expected soon. I want to note, and you've heard from Rachel and her perspective, I want to share that I've been with the PMB, Policy Management and Budget, for about 4 years, but I have about 20 years working in interior bureaus. And I want to share that based on that experience, I cannot emphasize enough how critical it is to have leadership engagement, direction, and support in this work. So the department's recent elevation of NAGPRA responsibilities and prioritizing repatriation framed in these 3 documents. I'll go over them with varying levels of detail, and we look forward to a discussion with questions and comments on these efforts. So the first memorandum, departmental responsibilities for Native American human remains and cultural items. It's dated September 21st, 2023. From the Secretary of Interior's Chief of Staff, Rachel Taylor, to heads of bureaus and offices, requesting action to prioritize NAGPRA compliance. And in this memorandum, the Chief of Staff acknowledges the role Interior has played in the removal of Native American ancestors and cultural items from their rest and placement in collections. And it puts Interior's status as a compliance entity into perspective. Bureaus have inventoried more than 14,000 sets of Native American ancestors, yet 2,900 of them have yet to be published in notices of inventory completion, allowing for repatriation. At the time of this memo, DOI was considered the 9th largest collection of inventoried but unrepatriated Native American ancestors. But according to the ProPublica's website, Interior is now the 8th largest. In the memorandum, she recognizes that ancestors and cultural items may yet be identified in collections and need to be identified and reported. The memorandum also recognizes that bureaus are stewards of lands that contain Native American places of special meaning, including burial sites, and thus discoveries on agency lands continue and must be planned for and respectfully addressed in consultation with Indian tribes and in accordance with NAGPRA. So the memo calls out specifically the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Bureau of Land Management, the Bureau of Reclamation, Fish and Wildlife Service, and the National Park Service to prioritize and facilitate repatriation and demonstrate Interior's commitment to strengthening government-to-government relationships with Indian tribes and Alaska Native villages, honoring relationships with Native Hawaiian organizations, and promoting the President's goals for racial justice, equity, and inclusion. The memo issues a policy statement as a clear and unambiguous commitment to meeting our responsibilities, and it states that it is the policy of the department to respect and uphold the rights of lineal descendants, Indian tribes, Alaska Native villages, and Native Hawaiian organizations with respect to their ancestors' remains and funerary and cultural items. Bureaus shall prioritize actions and dedicate resources to expeditiously and respectfully complete the activities required by NAGPRA with the clear intention to repatriate and resolve disposition of ancestors and cultural items in a timely manner. Deference is to be given to Native American knowledge and authority and to tribal timeframes and procedures. Bureaus shall integrate and align requirements for NAGPRA and land use planning and authorizations, as well as for museum collections management. And bureaus shall facilitate the physical transfer and, upon request, reburial of Native American ancestors and cultural items in accordance with applicable law. In this memorandum, the Chief of Staff then tasks the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy, Management, and Budget to lead an interior-wide effort to update policies and develop departmental governance structures to ensure proactive compliance with NAGPRA, alerting that an action plan for this effort would be forthcoming. That action plan was issued a month later under a memorandum dated October 20th, 2023, Departmental Action Plan for the Repatriation of Native American Human Remains and Cultural Items, and a memorandum signed at that date in which the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Mooney emphasizes the commitment to this work, stating that the Departmental NAGPRA Action Plan was developed with input from the bureaus and offices and is intended to prioritize and accelerate repatriation, nurture collaboration, and achieve the new DOI policy statement. And then goes on to summarize the 4 interrelated components of the action plan attached to her memo: governance and coordination, department-wide policy, immediate Bureau compliance activities, and critical support for the bureaus. And I'll walk through those components. For governance and coordination, the action plan established 3 departmental groups. The first is a senior executive forum comprised of senior career officials from the bureaus and offices who oversee and coordinate department-wide actions and prioritize resources. The department's Executive Museum and Preservation Council is an existing chartered group and has incorporated NAGPRA into their portfolio and already met on this issue earlier this month and will continue to do so. Discussions have been valuable as the Bureau career leadership shares information on their current status as well as steps initiated to prioritize compliance. Those representatives are also to lead communication within their own bureaus to raise awareness and identify responsibilities among managers and line officers. The second group is a coordinating committee of senior technical leads serving as a community of practice as the bureaus develop and implement their own action plans, identify opportunities to partner, leverage resources, and collaborate to meet shared objectives and resolve common challenges. This group has been meeting informally, but is now formalizing, adding members, and started regular meetings. Discussions are fruitful, with several bureaus identifying opportunities to work together while also identifying areas for policy direction. The third group is a working group to develop department-wide NAGPRA policies. Comprised of colleagues from key offices offering a range of expertise, this group's work will be informed by the executives and bureau technical leads and produce drafts for bureau input, leadership review, and tribal consultation prior to finalizing. So let's talk a little bit about policy, which is the second component of the action plan. The task is to draft and issue department-wide NAGPRA policy, instilling this new NAGPRA policy statement, designate roles and responsibilities, and provide appropriate levels of direction for inventory and repatriation of Native American ancestors and cultural items in agency collections, as well as requirements for the discovery of Native American ancestors and cultural items on agency lands and for the treatment and disposition if removed. Policies should not just address NAGPRA's legal requirements, but integrate and put NAGPRA on par with other authorities, such as the National Environmental Policy Act, the National Historic Preservation Act, and the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, among other authorities relevant to land use, conservation planning, authorizations, and management. And these policies should also align with secretarial orders and direction on tribal consultation, co-stewardship, environmental justice, and Indigenous knowledge. The action plan also tasks development of a department-wide policy on reburial. Policies set the tone and direction going forward, but work is needed now and under the existing regulatory framework, which gets to the third component of the action plan, Bureau compliance activities. Acknowledged earlier, the department holds the 8th largest collection of ancestors reported on inventories, but not yet available for repatriation. These are listed by Bureau unit in Attachment B of the action plan. And therefore, to ensure expeditious repatriation within 6 months of the memo, or by April 20th, 2024, bureaus should complete notices of inventory completion for the 2,876 ancestors and 9,325 funerary objects listed in inventories, but not yet published in notices. April 20th, 2024 is the deadline, but with some caveats. If, through tribal consultation, Native American representatives request additional time, that needs to be honored. DOI's initiative should not rush them. Another important qualification is that when the final rule is published and goes into effect, bureaus must comply with that rule. If additional steps are required to update the inventory or address consultation requirements, the bureaus may need to shift the timeline, but stay, of course, within the timelines of the revised rule. However, any cases for which ancestors included in Attachment B are not in notices by April 20th, 2024, those cases need to be included in another deliverable, a bureau needs assessment and action plan, so that those cases are elevated and tracked. Completing these notices is a step to ramp up and repatriate ancestors already reported in inventories. But we know there's more work ahead. So bureaus are to produce needs assessments and their own action plans within 6 months or by April 20th, 2024, and submit these to the Assistant Secretary for Policy Management and Budget through their bureau director. These submissions should identify responsible and accountable officials, address known issues barring or delaying repatriation, preparations for implementing a final rule, update the Bureau's submission prepared in response to the 2010 Government Accountability Office recommendation for a needs assessment listing specific actions, resources, and time needed to complete the inventories and summaries. For collections requirements, the new assessment and action plan should include a compilation of all human remains and cultural items whose existence is documented but not reported in NAGPRA inventories or summaries, a list of institutions likely holding Bureau collections, and establish clearer criteria to determine control. For new discovery requirements, the action plan should include Bureau's steps for addressing new discoveries of Native American ancestors and cultural items on or removed from agency lands after NAGPRA was enacted, current procedures and/or needed improvements to incorporate NAGPRA with other land management and stewardship activities. If notice publication is a jump to resolve current outstanding inventory issues, the needs assessment and action plan serves as an ongoing work plan, listing accountable officials, documenting procedures and needed improvements, logging cases and issues to monitor and track towards resolution, which overall provides transparency and elevates to the forefront the scope of ancestors waiting repose and the department's progress. Finally, the action plan addresses measures to support the Bureau activities and collaboration. Offices with technical and legal expertise will advise, train, and assemble information and tools. And we in the Office of the Secretary are here to help and facilitate critical support for the bureaus in this work. To conclude, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Mooney will continue to oversee this department-wide effort, utilizing the governance and coordination forums through PMB staff like Rachel and me to connect and support departmental activities. I've gone through these documents, but will end by highlighting attachment A of the action plan, which is a one-page list of actions and timeframes at 6-month, 18-month, and 24-month benchmarks. We have attention and momentum to this task with the aspiration to be leaders in meeting the regulatory requirements that the department sets for all. And with that, we welcome your questions, your comments, and I'll cross my fingers for no more technology snafus.
Members, questions?
Sure.
Yes, Armin?
Either for Emily or Rachel. I guess first question. Department of Interior has roughly about 1,111 holdings or collections. I guess first question is, does the Interior know where all these collections are? Second question is, have these holdings or collections been inventoried? And if not, when will they be inventoried?
So I'll start by sharing that the figure that I gave, the estimate of 2,900, but there's an exact number that I read, which I can pull back up, but is in the action plan, 2,800, are listed in inventories, either categorized as culturally affiliated or culturally unidentifiable. But no notice has been published. No notice of inventory completion has been published. So therefore, they're not available for repatriation. So that's that figure. Are there other collections that have not been inventoried? We think so. And that's what makes the needs assessment and the Bureau action plans that the bureaus are tasked with preparing over the next 6 months to come up with a listing of all of the collections that are documented to exist but have not been in inventories, moving towards getting those ancestors and cultural items into inventories. Over the process of the next 6 months, it's likely, I would think, that the final rule will be published, and that rule establishes tasks and timelines.
Well, Emily, I guess to quote you, and you said, we think that there are holdings or collections that have not been inventoried. We think. So if it would be beneficial for the committee and for your efforts as well is to know for sure rather than we think. Because it's important that these collections, and this is 2023, and for all these years, the NAGPRA law has been in the works. And for Interior to say that collections or holdings have not been inventoried. So that's a concern. So Rachel, it would be important for us as a committee and for the tribes to know exactly how these unidentifiable collections are going to be addressed. Because again, to quote Emily, we think. That's concerning, Rachel.
Appreciate you raising that concern and completely understand that concern. And we are working through this process with our bureaus and offices to identify the collections. And I hear you, and we will certainly take that back to our leadership and to Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Mooney and have her raise that across the department to her peers, the other assistant secretaries, as well as bureau directors. We do recognize the need to have a full inventory and have a full accounting and are committed to doing that.
Thank you, Rachel. Also on the same, another question from the November 1 meeting we had a presentation from Leslie Schmidt, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And during her report, she cited
Armand, if I could just jump in, I want to be clear that Leslie was presenting from the Forest Service.
Oh, the Forest Service, okay.
Yes, which is not within the Department of the Interior.
Oh, okay. All right, I retract. So, Rachel, again, your action plan that was presented by Emily, and it cited that Interior is the 8th largest with collections. And also, I think that goes in line as well, Rachel, with those holdings or those collections. I don't know if that number is excluding these holdings or collections. And then finally, Rachel, it was cited by Emily, the GAO report. It would be beneficial for the community to know exactly how this GAO report is going to be worked and addressed. So thank you.
Thank you again for those comments. Yes, the GAO report that was cited is from, I believe, 2010. And the department provided, responses and work on evaluations following that GAO report. We will be working with that information that was provided by the bureaus in 2010 as a base to then update that work and update the information that was provided. So I think the good news in this is that we're not starting from scratch. We do have the ability to, use past data. The other side of this is we recognize there's a lot that should have been done and needs to be done. And we are focusing our efforts and look forward to working with the committee on this and addressing your questions and concerns going forward. And welcome all comments and recommendations from the committee as we work through this process. And I'll defer to Emily or Melanie if they want to address any other items from, I think, the GAO report, because I know you all worked on that more directly than I did.
Well, I'll just add, we were trying to start, not start from scratch. I mean, the 2010 GAO report required a needs assessment, which the bureaus completed in August 2021. And in that, Interior reported having $850,000 in dedicated NAGPRA funds. This was NPS, $572,000 in other funds for NAGPRA, and needing an additional $3.34 million annually for 5 to 7 years to assure full compliance with sections 5 and 6, or the collections provisions of NAGPRA. So that's a foundation. We can note that no increases or changes in oversight occurred after submission of those needs assessments, but the effort was valuable and can now serve as a foundation that the bureaus can build from 13 years later. But also that the current effort, the audience and the utility are different. Those were needs assessments submitted to Congress per GAO, but now what we're looking at is internal bureau working document for agency use to engage, identify, monitor, and track issues, cases towards resolution, and characterize those needs assessments. And just to come back to, are there collections that are the responsibility of the National Park Service or the Bureau of Indian Affairs or the Bureau of Land Management or the Bureau of Reclamation or the Fish and Wildlife Service that have not been reported in inventories? I think that those bureaus have been coming to the committee for a number of years now, sharing the reality is that, yes, there are likely collections that are unreported. The challenges we've talked about, working with repositories to confirm existence of collections, contents of collections, land jurisdiction, and it's so I sort of want to come back to it's known, and I think that the bureaus have been speaking to that in certainly reports to the review committee. I think it was also important for departmental leadership to hear and understand like the complexities of, we're not just talking about ancestors and items that are within our own buildings, but that there's 100 years of collecting that has gone on. And yes, progress has been made. And I think I've said to this review committee before, maybe I'm just a glass is half full because I keep thinking about what's next. What else can we do? What more can we do? So coming back to what is being pressed upon the bureaus to do is to expedite notice publication for the ancestors that have been in inventories. But that work is not done. That's the next 6 months. But then also during the 6 months is really getting a true handle on the entire scope. Because also in the proposed rule, which we expect something to this effect in the final rule, is that repositories, museums and universities that think that they have federal collections are going to be required to notify the federal agency. And there's going to be a very quick time frame back and forth between the agency and the museum to sort that out. And that's why we have in the action plan that the bureaus need to be ready to receive those contacts and to be working with their attorney advisors and solicitor's office to be able to affirm control so that they can move forward with the consultation and inventory requirements that the rule will have leading towards repatriation. So
Yes, Tim.
Ms. Brown, I want to thank you very much for coming and talking to us. It is heartening to see the Assistant Secretary for Policy Management and Budget to take such an active role in this, and I think congratulations are in order. I have marked April 20th, 2024 on my calendar, and I would request or suggest to my committee members that we issue a invitation at this point that perhaps you can come back and talk to us and update us on the status of that. Obviously, this committee is unusual in some reasons that we issue an annual report to Congress. One of the things that often in those committee reports is we ask for additional funding for various things. We've been in sort of a conundrum the last couple of years because with the development of the proposed rule, the estimates seem to be very, very low. And that's gotten us to sort of begin soliciting from museums and from federal agencies real estimates of actual costs, and Illinois State Museum was very helpful in providing us with that a little earlier. One of the things I understand that there have been some estimates that have been prepared by DOI bureaus and other bureaus regarding those costs, but when we've asked to see those, that was denied. So if I could ask for the Assistant Secretary to remember that we're over here and that we need to have accurate numbers in order for us to do our job and to make recommendations to Congress on funding levels. Lastly, Emily talked a little bit about collections from BLM land, in Indian Affairs land, Park Service land that may be in other repositories. And one thing that I'd like to throw out that perhaps the Assistant Secretary of Policy Management and Budget can sort of get behind as well is there's been an long-standing request for the Solicitor's Office to issue an opinion on the ownership of collections from Indian land collected pursuant to the Antiquities Act. And I know that the original request that came from Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs Gover speculated that perhaps since those came off of Indian land, that actually the Indian tribes were the proper owners in the first instance and not the United States. So any assistance that the Assistant Secretary for Policy Management and Budget can weigh in on to sort of move that forward. It's been a long time in coming, and I think we need to see the answer to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those recommendations and for your comments. I greatly appreciate it. And one, I would like to just say, I am always happy to come and speak to the committee anytime you wish to extend an invitation. It's an honor to come and engage with you all. And then two, I would encourage you to also issue an invitation to Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Mooney. This is something that she takes very seriously and she is personally committed to, and I know she would be pleased to come and speak with you. I will definitely take those items back to her. She works, day in and day out with Solicitor Anderson and others across Interior, and we are happy to engage on those items that you raised. And I'll obviously work with Melanie and her staff on the list of items that you raised as well, along with Emily. And I think a lot of what you raised is part of what we see as the ongoing work of PMB coordination across Interior. And as for the point on the budget, I completely understand where you are coming from, and we will work with our colleagues to provide as much information as possible. As you know, for the current year process on the budget. We are currently in negotiations with OMB over our annual budget. And I think once the president's budget has been announced, we are always able to share additional information following that release. But would be happy to work with the committee on questions that have come up and questions that you raise. As a former OMB examiner myself for Indian Affairs, I know the importance of the budget in making sure policies have the resources behind them, that laws that are authorized are also appropriated. And so happy to continue the conversation with the committee. So thank you very much.
Further questions by the members?
Chair.
Yes,
Rachel,
Angela. Oh, I'm sorry. Angela's had her hand up for some time.
Oh, color mine. Hold on, Ivan. Sorry, Angela. Go ahead.
Okay, I want to echo Tim's remarks. I really appreciate the development of, the documents that you presented. I have been involved with NAGPRA for many, many years and making comments about to the different agencies that I work with about governance and coordination and the development of policy and updating all of those things so they're consistent across the board. I'm really excited about that. I have high hopes for for all of this going forward. I'm very supportive of that. So I really wanted to express that because I have been, it has been an issue working with the different agencies because everyone does things very differently. So, some agencies do things very well and some need some additional assistance. And I really like to see them getting together and sharing that knowledge amongst themselves, so we're not reinventing the wheel every time we're coming upon a new situation. So I am fully supportive of this initiative.
Thank you so much.
Chair.
Wait, hold on, Ivan. Can I just ask a question first of Emily? Can you give us an idea of how many ancestor remains have been repatriated by the Department of Interior's bureaus and offices, so that we have a sense of what's outstanding, as compared to what's already been done? First question. Second question is, while I agree with my colleagues, I cannot help but feel frustrated at the same time because we're 33 years in. One would hope that prioritizing NAGPRA compliance should have been the policy day one. And so absolutely encouraged by the active participation of the Assistant Secretary, but at the same time, just, what gives? This should have happened a long time ago. You have access to the National NAGPRA program's expertise when it comes to challenges faced, just like other museums, and and hundreds of repatriations have occurred. So if you could give us an idea of how many has been repatriated and then what are the obstacles that still stand in the way besides funding?
Sure. Well, so across the department, the bureaus and offices, it's approximately 14,000 sets of ancestors have been inventoried. 2,900 remain on inventories, but not in notices. So that's about 10,000 have been. Now I'm pausing. They are available for repatriation or have been repatriated. And I just make that, perhaps it's not it is a distinction because sometimes tribes don't make a claim, but we can, you know, we can go into some more granular levels of data, which is actually maintained by the National NAGPRA program and now posted to the ProPublica website on, so it's about 10,000 have been, sorry, I'm nervous, so I can't suddenly do math in my head, but 14,000 inventoried, 2,900 remain. So that's progress. Referencing earlier my comment about what's next or what hasn't been inventoried, that's, you know, that in some ways is part of the challenges of the land managing agencies and work being done on those lands, permitted or not, over a century, and the dispersal. So working with repository partners. Before going on to it's 33 years later, what gifts, but did that answer your question, Mr. Chairman? On progress?
Yes, because that really now makes it clear in terms of what the starting point was and what's been accomplished. So I actually should started there. Okay, go ahead.
So to your point, so for career colleagues who have been doing this work for a long time, I think at the department, I think there's aspects of this initiative and Deputy Assistant Secretary Mooney's attention and her collaboration with the Assistant Secretaries for Indian Affairs and Fish, Wildlife and Parks, and Water and Science on this initiative. And the policy statement coming out from the Chief of Staff is new. The departmental policies are organized into departmental manuals. I won't get too bureaucratic, but that's the core policies for the department. And the NAGPRA appears in 5 of those departmental manuals and a secretarial order dating from maybe 1994 to 2007. Bureau, and those are principally devoted to the important work that's delegated for the National NAGPRA program and related activities. So in a lot of ways, that's been a very strong focus and priority for the department. Bureau and office compliance is in one of those departmental manuals and is referenced in the secretarial order, and basically says Bureau and office heads are required to make sure that the laws are followed. So we don't actually have anything more than that right now. So this is a game changer. The lack of visibility for some of these requirements can be a challenge with managers, line officers who have broad portfolios of responsibilities, and making sure that they're aware and what they're responsible for, and having a policy that they can turn to and say, okay, this is how it fits. This is why this is part of my portfolio. Why that hasn't happened until now, I can't really speak to that, but what I can speak to is the game changer shift that occurs with having senior leadership focus not just on the critical work of the National NAGPRA program and the review committee, the grants, the regulations, but our own house, what our own bureaus are responsible for. It's sometimes been it's sometimes sort of been on the periphery. So
just to follow up real quick, and to be clear, I am a career person. I've served in the department for over 10 years now. I think this is the first time I've seen, you know, leadership who really understands across the board the responsibilities to work with tribes, the government to government relationship, the special relationship that we have with Native Hawaiian communities, and the responsibilities under NAGPRA. I mean, you have a secretary who's leading from the top in all of these issues. You have a solicitor and a deputy solicitor who are Native and understand these issues. We have a director of the National Park Service who started his career working on these issues with his tribe. And so I have never seen sort of an alignment of expertise and people who deeply understand this commitment and these issues. And I am just very excited to work with you all and take advantage of this moment and this leadership to really advance DOI's work and make DOI a leader in this field. And so I am saddened that it has taken this long, but I do look forward to working with you all to make these changes and really bring DOI to the leadership role that I know it can be.
If I can add, I remembered that in the late 1990s, there was a big Bush budget initiative. Oh, and forgive me because I'm about to have AV tech come by and deliver electricity to this laptop. That's in the late 1990s, around 1999, there was an initiative where the then Assistant Secretary for Policy Management and Budget was pushing and encouraging a budget initiative for NAGPRA that I do believe that was in the president's budget, but ultimately not enacted by Congress. And then administrations changed, priorities shifted. But I also wanted to give some notes here to the bureaus who are actually doing the work. And while these memoranda came out just this fall, they've been in the works for a year, a lot of coordination with leadership in the bureaus. And so bureaus have been getting a jump on things. Fish and Wildlife Service created and hired their first ever curator and NAGPRA coordinator position, which they never had anyone dedicated to that before. We're only ever as good as our team, right? And mine is going overboard. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, you met Rashonda Lee at the conference at your meeting earlier this year, and she was a new hire. The whole BIA team of 3 is all new in the last couple of years. A regulation that just came out, I think a week ago, Reclamation modified and published a new public conduct rule that reverses the prohibition on reburial. So Reclamation, their rule just came out, I think in the last week, that allows reburial of repatriated ancestors on Reclamation lands. Reclamation also has conducted an internal control review and recently awarded a contract with a vendor to help develop those inventories of unreported collections in repositories. I think the National Park Service issued a directive earlier this year in June on similar, ramping up notice publication. BLM's looking to hire a term NAGPRA coordinator. NAGPRA has been incorporated into BLM state director performance plans. When I kind of sat down and reflected at what's been going on over the last 6 to 8 months, as the conversation started with the first meeting that Ms. Mooney held with her colleagues and the bureau directors, that's a list that never happened. A lot of these are new, totally new events, and so that is encouraging. And so we'll have an infrastructure to be able to sustain this work.
Yeah, mahalo for those responses. Why don't we go back to Armin first, and then Angela, Dominique, and Shelley.
The chair,
Go ahead, Armin.
just 2 last things, Rachel. If we could please, Rachel, get a regular update as a committee on the 1,111 holdings or collections. And then the second thing is, if there's anything that the committee can do to assist or help, please let us know, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you for that invitation and for that offer. We really appreciate it. And I know we will be back to the committee and happy to come anytime invited. And appreciate the offer for assistance. I know as we work through the policies, development, and the interagency coordination pieces, all of the committee's insights and recommendations will be valuable. So thank you so much for that offer.
Angela, go ahead.
My question is about funding. How is that funding going to be allocated across the bureaus? Is that going to be automatically available to them, or do they have to provide some sort of a project assessment to you to access that funding? Because that's always been an issue for us as tribes, that agencies don't have the dedicated personnel or funding to, work on repatriation exclusively.
This initiative as of yet does not have direct funding tied to it. What I'll share, and Rachel, defer to you, but the action plan does direct the bureaus and offices to coordinate current and future budget formulation and allocation of resources to address the required NAGPRA actions. As Rachel mentioned, the 24 budget is out, but the 25 budget is under negotiation with OMB.
I just want to add, the assessments that we are envisioning, or that we will be updating, that all of that information will help to inform bureaus as they build their annual budgets. Our goal is that this type of NAGPRA work would be incorporated and planned for and funded just as any other responsibility within the bureaus and offices, and would be, a regular part of budget formulation. And so we will continue to ask that through the budget process, and continue. The principal deputy assistant secretary is very committed to making sure bureaus are considering the needs within the budgets that they're submitting through the annual budget process. And as Emily said, we are currently in negotiations with OMB. And so as soon as the budget is finalized, the president will release his budget. We can provide additional updates then on funding that's been allocated through that process. And so we would welcome insights and input from the committee on information that you all have gathered. I know and understand that you all have done your own outreach on funding to institutions. And so I think having a full set of information, right, from both the bureaus, once we can share once our budgets are released, as well as the information you are gathering independently, will help to give a more full picture of the needs across both museums and federal agencies, or I should say, I won't speak for other federal agencies within the Department of Interior. Thank you.
Angela, are you done?
Yes, for this very second. We have a million questions overall.
All right, Shelby.
I think Dominic was before me. Okay, well, I'll go ahead. I want to thank both of you so much for your presentations today, and also for sending the plan information and so on to us ahead of time. I have a question that actually has more to do with relationships between the federal agencies, especially within DOI, and museums that serve as repositories for the collections. I've worked for two museums, one a state museum and one a private museum, that have received funds through the Bureau of Indian Affairs to help inventory the BIA collections within those two institutions. But I haven't seen that coming from other agencies. So I'm really glad to hear you thinking about, how funding could be more available to get these inventories done, because I think sometimes museums have collections that they're not even sure what federal agency they might belong to because of lack of documentation and that kind of thing. And one of the issues that as a committee that we've talked a lot about are split collections, because one agency may have collections in a number of different institutions from a particular site or a particular project for one reason or another. So I just wanted to ask your thoughts on the relationship of federal agencies these days with some of these repositories. What your sense is?
That's such a great question, and I could go on, and the short answer is that it depends. But one aspect of my team's portfolio is in supporting the bureaus on their museum collections management, and that includes working with repositories, museums and universities housing those collections, encouraging the creation and maintenance of agreements, funded or not funded, right? We have to be able to have a conversation even if we don't have dollars on the table. There's shared interests and responsibilities. And so there are instances where we have institutions that we regularly partner with, have ongoing relationships, and those are very positive. We want to emulate those. And then there's other situations that are more difficult. The funding piece, the BIA was successful, and I think continues to be successful at allocating funds either through contract or assistance agreement for this work. Some of the funding that the BIA had in the past, as well as other bureaus like the Bureau of Land Management, was actually a funding line that came through the Department, Office of the Secretary. From 2014 to 2019, there was $1 million allocated specific to museum collections, and most of that was doled out to the bureaus, with a good portion going to partnerships with repositories. I think at the August 2019 review committee meeting, I gave some information on that, and I can dig that up and share that with you. Unfortunately, that appropriation was discontinued in 2018, and it was noted. It was definitely noted by our partners.
Thank you.
Hi, were you done, Shelby? You mentioned earlier that Reclamation had reversed their ban on reburial areas on reclamation lands. I'm wondering if you have any indication that other bureaus are looking to end their bans on reburial on bureau lands, and specifically the Park Service.
That's a great question. I'm going to pause, and I don't know if others are more knowledgeable to that. My understanding across let me preface with, one of the tasks in the action plan for policy development is to draft department-wide policy on reburial, period. To look at what our statutory authorities are and come up with a policy framework to address that, because the inconsistency among the bureaus as well as other federal agencies has been a known issue for as long as I can remember. The Bureau of Land Management had a prohibition on reburial up until 2006, and it was a policy decision to change it, seeing that they believed they had the discretionary authority. But there are some caveats to that. Park Service, I think, does allow reburial, but there are some caveats for when they require a waiver. But I'll leave it at that and share that it would probably be useful if we were all more fluent in, and I know that this team working on this initiative will become more fluent in the current status of reburial and where we can make this process more aligned and consistent. Is there something more on is your understanding of a general prohibition, or is it a prohibition in particular situations like the ancestors are not from those lands?
Yes, so that's the prohibition that I'm referring to, that they have to come from Park Service lands. But in a state like Florida, it's really challenging to find land for reburial. And so having those larger swaths of land that are federally protected be kind of completely banned outright is really challenging for us down here in the South. So it'd be great if we had those areas available, especially when we have those land managers that are willing and, you know, happy to accommodate those requests, but they're just banned by policy.
Absolutely. Lands for reburial is an issue. And I know that this committee has visited on it a number of times. So we hear you in that request and that interest. Thank you.
Yes, Tim.
Ms. Brown, I think you had mentioned that you would be interested in information that we have collected about costs. And I'll refer you to our FY 2023 report to Congress, which we approved November the 1st and is in the meeting materials for this meeting. We have a listing of the museums and federal agencies that provided us with detailed information about costs, particularly focused on the cost of the new regulations. And you might also want to pass on to the Assistant Secretary that because the initial memo was issued on September the 21st, we were able to count it as a FY23 accomplishment. So it's one of 6, what did they call them? One of 6 examples of progress made. So we have a fairly lengthy description of the memos there, and this will be going to Congress.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, thank you for flagging that for me. I will definitely take a look, and I know Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Mooney will be very interested in it as well. So thank you. I'll share that with her.
Are there additional questions or comments? Again, thank you for presenting and for updating us, and we look forward to April 2024 update and see where we're at. And you can count on the committee's support to make sure we can help prioritize compliance as well. So mahalo.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is time for public comment. We also received written comment that was posted to the meeting materials and shared with the review committee directly. Every meeting of the review committee includes time for public comment, as is a requirement under FACA. If you are interested in providing a public comment at this meeting, you may raise your hand to make a public comment. If you are on the phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 from your dial pad, and that will allow me to see that you raised your hand. Yes, Toby, I see your hand is raised.
Yes. I just have a little comment here. Really thankful to be a part of this committee. This is my second meeting and being able to learn some things. You know, it's the last meeting I had with the folks, I spoke about treaty, I spoke about sovereignty, and what I heard today. The lady from Illinois, the Illinois State Museum things, talking about how there's no federally recognized tribes in those states, you know, I mean, and it's probably just me too, though, but I made a trip over to St. Louis last year. And I went to Weldon Springs, and one of the workers at Weldon Springs was talking about this used to be a native area. This used to be where the Indians used to live, the Native Americans used to live here. Is there any information that you have? I sat there and I felt really bad because I really didn't have no information to share with that lady about that tribe that she was seeking information on. One of the reasons why I signed up to be on the board of trustees for the Confederated Tribes is to speak up for my people. And since I've been on the board, it's grown huge. To the point of where I'm on the National NAGPRA committee now. And it's not just my people I'm speaking for, it's for all the other tribes. Maybe the tribes that don't have that voice. You know, that it goes to the old story that we have here, and it's a story run on throughout Indian country about our beginning of time and how we were one and how we got moved to certain areas of the land and learn how to live there. And as soon as you come across one of your brothers or they travel to that area, you can reach out and help that person. You can reach out and share with them the knowledges that you have on how to survive in this part of the country. You know, now we don't have no more brothers or sisters there in Illinois or Ohio or Indiana or Missouri, Kentucky. And you know, I'm just kind of seeing this picture here of how big this National NAGPRA Review Committee is, and I'm really honored to be on here. Learning a lot by having to listen to all of you speak and what you're speaking on, the presentations that have been presented, all worthwhile, everything, and everything about being able to take care of our ancestors, regardless of who they are, where they come from, you know, that's really makes me happy to be on this committee with you folks. So I just kind of wanted to make a statement and looking forward to seeing what, you know, what more there is for us is in the future to take care of our ancestors, to take care of these people in a good way. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Toby. And we do have someone who's requested to speak, Noreen DiMaggio, you may unmute.
Hello?
Yes,
Can you
hello.
hear me?
Yes, we
okay.
can.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate being able to have a public comment at this time. One of the things that came to mind is that, one, the new rules not funded, we're all aware of that agencies and museums will be working off of their existing budgets. And the thought that came up was, as this goes forward, the repository expenses will probably be less when the ancestors return. So that looking forward, you know, all of this will change, and how will that be incorporated into the next steps, you know, in the future notion of what's going to be happening. So that was merely a thought, and if anyone had anything to add to that, that'd be great. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Chair, there are no other hands that are raised.
We're going to move on to the next agenda item.
Certainly. The next item on the agenda is the report to Congress for fiscal year 2023. As was mentioned earlier, the report to Congress was approved by this committee on November 1st. Subsequent non-substantive edits were made to that report. And a copy of the final report was published to the meeting materials for this meeting. I don't believe there's any other discussion, but I turn it over to the review committee.
Members, there's discussion.
Just as a reminder, the report is final.
Yep. All right, Tim. Unmute.
Here we go. At the last meeting, there was some discussion about how we could get the report into a broader circle of people, particularly with museums and tribes. And we had come up with a list. I don't think it's been posted yet, but I think it would be useful to do that. I think all of the committee members have seen it. And I guess I could read it into the record if it's not posted.
There's no need to read it into the record. We would be happy to post that. We're using that to prepare the report for delivery. I wasn't aware that the committee was requesting me to add that to the public materials. We can certainly do that.
I guess I was a little concerned, since we had come up with it not in the public, that it would be good for us to have a discussion of it in the public.
There's nothing in that list that struck me as being unusual from our normal distribution list for your report to Congress. I don't see any need for the committee to take an action on that distribution list, unless anyone has any additional individuals that they think should be added to that distribution list.
No, except that, just a reminder, Melanie, on email dated November 17th, I had requested it to be the proposed list to be placed on the agenda for this meeting so that we could formally approve it, to have the discussion that Tim was referring to now.
I apologize. I don't see the distribution list as an item that needs your action. As an official committee, it is a recommendation of individuals for distribution, and we will use that list to distribute the report.
Then can we publicly agree as a committee that we all saw the list and approve it for distribution, for sharing the public service?
That's fine. It's not really necessary, but that's,
Well, we want to make sure that, as Tim explained earlier, that there's a wider scope of distribution, because there's some important points, especially the financial information that's being shared, and the committee's desires to expand the scope, level of awareness.
Yes, and I will just remind the committee as well as the public that all of the reports to Congress are available on the National NAGPRA program website. So anyone can access those going back to the first report in 1992. Excellent.
So I take it we don't need to take any additional action on
I don't think so. I apologize again for the confusion. I'll be sure that we post that list to the meeting materials.
All right. Thank you. Any other matters related to, I think that was the main one, because the report has been approved. Main issue was the proposed distribution list. Are there any other comments?
Aloha.
Yes, sir.
I think in your message, you had asked if we could have Melanie come up with a proposed time schedule.
Correct.
I think it would be
Correct.
useful if we could get this distributed to Congress by the end of December.
Correct. Thank you for reminding me. That was, Melanie, could you respond to that?
Certainly, in response to your email, I did confer with our controlled correspondence unit. You know, we're working, we've completed the draft cover letters. We've prepared our briefing statements in the full package. Those are currently with the Office of Congressional Affairs within the National Park Service to be sure that all of the I's and T's are where they should be. And then that next step will be to put it into our correspondence system for review and approval throughout the department. As we have discussed many times in the past, the process for the approval of the report, while the content of the report remains the same, it is the cover letter that the department issues, and that goes through several offices before it gets signed and can be distributed to Congress. I don't have a definite estimate for you on when that report will be delivered. I will say that, you know, correspondence in general has been moving fairly quickly here within the department. But I do have to remind the committee that the month of December is in particularly a busy time for the department and for the leadership of the department in particular. You know, I think that delivery before December might be difficult, before the end of December. And I would also remind the committee that Congress is only has a couple of weeks before they take their recess through the end of the holiday season and won't be back until the middle of January. So I think that is also important to remember.
Thank you. We then wish to convey our desire that the National NAGPRA program proceed expeditiously with the distribution process, and that you know, we're clear that the report get out as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I meant to say, especially given the prioritization of NAGPRA compliance as now a matter of policy. So thank you so much. Any other comments with respect to the fiscal year 2023 report to Congress? I don't see any. All right, back to you, Melanie.
Thank you. The last item on the agenda today is a discussion of upcoming meetings, which we have discussed previously. Even at the last meeting on November 1st, received additional input from the committee on priorities for dates as well as locations. And we are committed to continuing to work on the locations as well as the priorities that the committee has established for future meeting dates in the next calendar year. So I don't have much more of an update than that. I don't know if any committee members have specific suggestions that they'd like to share. I will say that I don't feel it's beneficial to us to talk dates on these public phone calls. I feel it's more efficient when we do that by email. As soon as we conclude this meeting, we'll be reaching out to each of you for dates in the new year.
Are there any comments with regard to Tim?
Let's see, give me a second. I'd like to make my pitch again. that I think that we should have the next face-to-face meeting in California. Per the 2023 program report, that as of September the 30th, California institutions held 7,385 ancestors, the third highest total after Illinois and Ohio. The largest collection is at the University of California, Berkeley, with 4,907. The situation in California is particularly complex because of their state law, which may conflict with NAGPRA in some regards. CalNAGPRA is administered by the California Native American Heritage Commission and requires repatriation to non-federally recognized Indian groups in some situations. The California legislature has been very active in auditing repatriation at both the University of California and the California State University systems and has recently amended their state law. I'd propose that we consider either Berkeley, because that's where the University of California, Berkeley is, or Sacramento, which is where the Native American Heritage Commission and the California legislature meets, and develop a list like we had done for Bloomington to invite specific museums and tribes. And some of the suggestions I would recommend are the representatives of the Office of the President of the University of California System, as well as the University of California, Berkeley, Office of the President of California State University System, the Native American Heritage Commission, the California legislature, including their auditing staff, all federally recognized tribes in California, and all non-federally recognized tribes identified by the Native American Heritage Commission. I don't think it's necessary for us to have a sponsor or to meet on campus. I think if we can come up with a date, we can find other venue to do it in the state that would make it possible given our schedules.
Thank you, Tim. Members, comments?
Chair.
Yes, Simon.
Thank you, Tim. Still, I'm going to put it out that the committee consider meeting in Green Bay. Mainly because the committee hasn't met near the Great Lakes for a number of years. So that's my pitch, Tim. Green Bay in person next year.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate that input. And as I said, we'll be reaching out to each of you to identify dates as soon as we conclude this meeting. Mr. Chair, that was the last item on the agenda. I'm not sure what you'd like to do at this time, if you'd like to have any closing comments or move to adjourn or.
All right, I'm inclined to move to adjourn. We are in
Mr. Chair, I'd actually recommend we vote on meeting location.
We don't, I would prefer we didn't. There are lots of factors that go into planning a meeting and where we can meet and when we can meet. There's no need, we've never had votes on the issue before. We will do our best to explore all the different options that are available to us.
but the committee's view on the matter should be noted, correct?
Well, more important than I would say, there are other issues at play besides the committee's preference here, involving, especially at this time, the cost and the status of the federal budget. So there are other issues here, and I would prefer that we work through the options and identify dates and move forward from there. This is something we can discuss over email. It does not need to be a public discussion. There's not a deliberation necessary. I'm happy to seek your input on locations individually through email as we do with the dates.
There.
Yes, Armin.
All right, well, Melanie, I hope this will help. I'll make a motion that our next in-person meeting be at Green Bay.
Could you repeat that? I couldn't hear you.
A motion, our next in-person meeting next year be at Green Bay, Wisconsin. That's my motion.
Well, Armand, again, as I said, I really would prefer that we not make a formal motion or votes on this issue. I'd prefer the opportunity to work with you all individually over email to identify dates first and then locations.
Okay, I'll withdraw my motion then.
Thank you.
Any further comments?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Armin.
Melanie, if we can, when we do have our in-person meeting, if we could put on the agenda the 2023 13 allegations and an update on those 13 allegations of failure to comply.
Yes, sir.
Second item, U.S. Army, they've made some good progress with NAGPRA and repatriation. And they need to be commended on that. However, U.S. Army does not know what the other hand is doing. And specifically, their planned excavation of Native American human remains at the site of U.S. Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. So it's very clear, Melanie, that the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. And it's concerned because the Army is ignoring the requirements of NAGPRA. This is a concern. So it would be beneficial for you and I to know what the situation is at U.S. Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
Thank you. I will seek information on the committee's behalf.
Okay. Then the last question, Melanie, is what's the current situation or workings with Phoebe Hearst?
Are you asking what the work of the National NAGPRA program is with
Yes.
the Phoebe Hearst Museum? That's the University of California, Berkeley.
Okay.
Yes,
And
that,
that's what Tim was talking about.
yes, that's correct.
Okay, okay. All right, that's all.
Yes, Tim.
I've got one bit of old business. At the November 1st meeting, we had scheduled to discuss the report to the NAGPRA program report. But we didn't have it at that point. We got it after that point. So I was wondering if we could take a little bit of time to look at that and comment on it. And I got some questions about it.
Melanie?
Certainly, I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Okay. I noticed that on page 8, which is the set of Native American individuals by institution and federal agency, I think there's 20 of them listed there. But down at the bottom, it says more lists available at https://publictableau.com, and it's the Tableau website. When I go to the Tableau website, I notice that this year, there is not separate listing for each museum in each federal agency, whereas last year there was. And it makes it very difficult to find that information. And I know that everybody is greatly enamored by the ProPublica website because it does many things, but it's not an official government site, even though the data, my understanding is comes from the Park Service. But it's not a government site. And the one thing that caught my attention is when I was trying to figure out what's going on with the DOI bureaus, they've lumped them all together in one entry on ProPublica. And there's no way to get that information separately outside of that, what was on the Tableau site. So I think removing that information from the Tableau site, the individual institution data on the Tableau site really obscures the process.
Okay, well, thank you for that input. The lists that are available under pending, under the pending tab on the Tableau site do list the numbers by specific museums that are still pending notification and publication, and does group individual agencies together. So that data is available for those items that are still pending. That same data is available on the National NAGPRA program website, although you would have to do the calculations yourself through exporting that data from our website to Excel. I want to be very clear that the official data source is our website, which is updated in real time as notices are published, as inventories are received and updated, that data is changed. So the Tableau data is static. It is as of September 30th, 2023. The reports of the numbers that are reported for the best data, I would encourage you to use the National NAGPRA program website databases.
So there is a different presentation on the Tableau site for 2023 than there is for 2022?
There's been a different presentation every year.
And on the Tableau site for 2023, it's possible for me to find the National Park Service's status as an agency by itself.
If you look at the big pending list under the pending tab, you will see the National Park Service has 702 Native American human remains that are pending.
Okay. Sorry if I missed that. It was because I looked at the one last year. It confused me because it looked different. I actually had some questions about the civil penalties section in the report.
Sure, I'll just add that if you go to that link that is specifically on page 8 of the program report, that takes you directly to those lists of numbers. So click that link in the PDF and it takes you there. It's a direct link.
For the civil penalties, it looks to me from looking at the numbers that you received 13 additional allegations of failure to comply in FY 2023. Is that correct?
Yes, that is what we reported.
And that 37 allegations were not substantiated. That's one more than last year. So there's an additional non-substantiated one that occurred in the last 12 months. Just by looking at the numbers from the two reports. Is that correct?
I don't have the 22 report open right now.
And the second piece to that is that there's a statement there that one allegation, the department declined to investigate the allegation. I would like to know what that means. And what criteria are used to make that decision?
I will have to look into we reported 36 unsubstantiated last year. And you were correct that we reported 37 in 23. I'm sorry, I was not prepared to answer that question. I'll need to look into that to provide that to you. I want to be sure that that one allegation that you mentioned that was declined to investigate is not the one that makes the difference between the 36 and the 37. And I apologize, I'm not ready to answer that right now. I was not prepared, but I will look into that and get back to you. As for what that means, that the department declined to investigate the allegation, that is also something that I'm not prepared to explain at this point in terms of what the process is for the department on its allegations and how it reviews and evaluates those allegations. But it is through that process of evaluating an allegation, whether or not the department continues to investigate the allegation.
Yeah, obviously I am very interested in the civil penalty allegations, as you know. I have never seen that written before. There's clearly a lot of allegations that have not been either determined that there was no failure to comply or that there was a failure to comply. There's a big number of the backlog of the pending, but I've never seen it where there's an explicit statement that one was declined. So that caught my attention. I think we had asked prior to getting this report and in preparation for the report to Congress that we were doing for two different charts, one of which is in here and it's very helpful, one of which is not. And that is what in the 2022 report was titled Table 5, Investigations Pending as of September 30th, 2022. And it lists 6 different status of investigation results. Active investigation, not yet begun, investigated in part, related to previous resolved allegation, related to repatriated items, investigation on hold. I think it would be useful for us to get that information. Obviously not as part of your report because you finalized that, but I think that information is useful to us.
I'll see what we can do to explain to you the status of the 10 allegations that we reported as requiring further investigation.
And last but not least, this is just something that I observed, not related to NAGPRA in particular, but related to a Park Service activity. My understanding is that there was circulated a draft national freeform format for any time any institution receives federal funds from the Park Service. And this would be sort of a national preform of what everybody would need to agree to. And one of the provisions in that draft read as follows: all human remains encountered as a result of federal financial assistance provided by the MPS shall be treated in accordance with NAGPRA, its regulations, or the applicable laws of the regulations of the state, tribe, or other municipality of which the project is located. I was concerned about that language, particularly with the or, because this document, which everybody needed to sign when they received their funding, hooked them into having to require to comply with NAGPRA. By accepting the money and having remains in their possession or control, NAGPRA applies. So it's not an or question. So in response to that, and this is from the comments that were submitted by the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, I'll just quote it. The statement implies that either NAGPRA or other local laws apply to disposition of Native American remains. NAGPRA's repatriation provisions apply to any institution that receives federal funds and has possession or control of Native American human remains, which is precisely the scope of this statement. The National Park Service does not have the authority to waive NAGPRA's requirements. NAGPRA requests changing the sentence as follows, quote, all human remains encountered as a result of federal financial assistance provided by the NPS shall be treated in accordance with NAGPRA and its regulations, and, if applicable, the laws of regulations of the state, tribe, or other municipality in which the project is located. If I might, if you could comment on that, or if we can have the solicitors comment on that, it seems to me that if you take the money, you follow the federal law. It's not either or. And this agreement goes along with the money.
Well, if I could just clarify, I think what you're referring to is the National Programmatic Agreement that the National Park Service has been consulting with Indian tribes and Native Hawaiian organizations on. It is a document under a National Programmatic Agreement under the provisions of Section 106 in the NHPA that relate to how the National Park Service provides federal financial assistance and covers its responsibilities under Section 106. The language that you're referring to, again, is a part of that programmatic agreement, which is still in draft form, has been under consultation. And I appreciate that you read NAGPRA's comments on that consultation and have provided that input. So I would say that you should look forward to the next phases of that National Programmatic Agreement. I want to be very clear that we're not talking about a form that's signed by grantees here. We're talking about a National Programmatic Agreement under the NHPA and Section 106, which is a slightly different thing. Nevertheless, it's important that that language be corrected and be accurate. And we appreciate NAGPRA's comments on it.
If I could follow up and ask either you or the solicitors, if an institution receives federal funds and receives state funds, both, and there's a federal law and a state law dealing with repatriation, they need to comply with both because they receive funds from both sources up until the point where there is some conflict between those two. Is that a fair characterization?
I believe that's a fair statement. Yes, there are, yes.
Okay. That's all I got.
Members, any other closing comments? Having heard none. Melanie?
Okay, we can go ahead and adjourn the meeting at this time. I appreciate your presence and attendance, and we will look forward to the next meeting.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Aloha.